Hi, I'm Zeynep Coach, a research fellow at Sharq Forum. Today we are in Istanbul for our conference towards the new security architecture for the Mena region. I have a very distinguished guest with me, Ms. Fatma Ceren Yazgan. She is the Deputy Director for Security and Intelligence Affairs at the Turkish MFA. Welcome, Mr. Ceren. How are you?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Today we want to talk with you about giving your expertise about the Turkey's position and Turkey's role in counterterrorism. My first question is, how Turkey positioned itself and how in classifying different terrorist groups, radical organizations in the region?
Well, Turkey has unfortunately, a long history of countering terrorism, and we have either the court decisions or we follow the United Nations designated list under the United Nations Security Council resolutions. So Turkey does not have a declared list of these organizations, but we know who they are. For instance, PKK, DHKPC, or THKPC. There are a couple of terrorist groups which were rooted from Turkey, and that they had been declared by the rule of law and the court decisions as such. And Al-Qaeda, Daesh, or their versions, changing their names, had been declared as terrorist groups as per the United Nations Security Council decisions since 2001. Actually, it has been going on. In 2013, for the first time, Daesh, as the new name of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, was declared as a terrorist group. Al-Nusra as such. So we do not necessarily categorize them. We declare them as, legally declare them as terrorist groups, but also it's the tactics they use. So when a terrorist group, which is not necessarily listed as a terrorist organization in Turkey previously, with the tactics they develop, such as suicide bombings, attacks against civilians, as well as security forces who are responsible for protecting the civilians, and all the other crimes that are included in the UN conventions and as per the Council of Europe, for instance, treaty, then our prosecutors come in and they prosecute them as crimes of terrorism.
So in Turkey, the categorization goes according to the tactics the terrorist groups use, rather than the ideological reasons they present
There is no
themselves.
distinction between the terrorist groups on the basis of ideology. I mean, of course, each terrorist group may have a different ideology, and even on that grand ideology, they may have different groups, fractions, and so on. But the tactics, we define terrorism by the tactics they use and by the acts. So there's, this is the main pillar of actually the Turkish counterterrorism policy, is that there is no distinction. You cannot differentiate among groups, entities using terrorist tactics on the basis of the ideologies. So it's, and actually this is what we have been warning our allies and partners, that you cannot use one terrorist group against another because you fancy the ideology of the first one and not the other one.
And given that, and you said unfortunately Turkey has a long history of counterterrorism, and can you tell us a little bit more? And we know Turkey has been very active against the fight against ISIS. Can you tell us the failures and the successes of the Turkish counterterrorism efforts?
I think first, there is no 100% foolproof counterterrorism, and this is also valid for Turkey. However, I think Turkey, and I'm proud to say that our security forces, our police, our gendarmerie, our military, had been very active in terms of facing this enormous challenge, which basically we did not create ourselves. I mean, ISIL, Daesh, was created beyond our borders. It was in Iraq, it crept into Syria. It wasn't until, 2014 we found them across our borders. And I think our not failures maybe, but our shortcoming, I would say, is that we did not know more about this organization. We didn't know our enemy, and the more we knew about it, and the more we started to see them as close by, I think our measures developed routinely. And of course, the border security was an issue. And despite the measures we have taken beginning from 2012-13, the refugee situation at the border, as well as other issues. So the border security was an issue, but I think that gradually since 2015 had been developed very profoundly. And so at the end of the day, I think we have prevented a lot of plots. We have in Daesh, in the foreign terrorist fighter issue, for instance, we had been cooperating with many partners, and we are the ones who initiated that cooperation. We have requested our partners to share information with us so that we can ensure people who were traveling to join these terrorist groups will not be able to do so through Turkey. We have, from 2011, we had 280 people maybe in that list. Today we have more than 52,000, and this is hard work. We have deported more than 4,000 people who were suspected to have links with these groups who were in the conflict region. They could be Al-Qaeda, they could be Daesh. We cannot surely know what they did there. We're not there, but we are trying to protect our own nation, our partners, and in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions 2170, 2178, they all came in June and September 2014. The measures we had been taking dates back to 2012, 13, 14. So I would think that could we have done more? I'm sure everybody could have done more, by the way. The west and the east of us could have done more, or the south of us. But Turkey had single-handedly introduced measures. We innovated measures. Risk analysis units at the airports is a pure Turkish innovation. Nobody told us to do that. We saw the need. Our police, counterterrorism and intelligence, they have developed these tools. So,
and who has been like good allies and like partners, and who have resisted the partnerships in terms of this foreign fighters issue? So, who helped, and like what are the limits or what are the problems in this foreign fighters issue?
No, in partnership in counterterrorism is a very sensitive issue because sometimes one country's police organization cooperates perfectly with their counterparts in Turkey, but judicial authorities of that same country wouldn't. Or one police section cooperates, the other one won't. It's very hard to categorize and grade countries, partners, for the level of their cooperation.
But I think there was this sense that some of the countries were intentionally not informing because they wanted to get rid of the people who are potential to be radicalized, so that they were more willing to let them go and try to join Daesh than maybe like stay.
I think there could be partially. Of course, this is an allegation that it's very hard to sort of prove that a country did not stop a person from going there intentionally, because the answer we were receiving was there is travel freedom, so we cannot stop their travels. Now, for the same reason, we couldn't stop their travels until the border. So how can I intercept someone if I'm not informed that this person has certain intentions? But frankly speaking, in this 52,000 no entry list, or in the 4,000 something, which our Director General of Immigration has a lot of labor into that. They are operating that deportations and so on with great sacrifices. We know that there are 99 countries in the deport list, and there are more than 100 countries in the 52,000. The reality is there are certain countries, for instance, post Arab Spring, North Africa, in certain countries didn't have the capacity to recognize and to diagnose the problem of radicalization and extremism, the networks, facilitation networks, which, by the way, were remnants of the Al-Qaeda. So they were not new ones. But the lesson learned, after all, for everyone is that if we don't do real cooperation in counterterrorism, it will strike back to all of us. There is no way that you can only postpone the threat, and it will strike back possibly stronger. So we should not leave this or channel the threat. We should face it, grab it by the horns. And I can't tell you that, first, it's not diplomatically right, but second, it's also true that almost in all countries, they missed people. They didn't realize that these people were going to go. But in some countries, as you have pointed out, they were aware of the travels, but they didn't have then the necessary legal and administrative means, and they told us so. So after 2178 was introduced, suddenly those measures which weren't there before were possible. But it's a big issue, and after all, these are human beings. Those human beings, young men and women, and mostly men, they were subjected to whatever conditions, and not necessarily all because of poverty, not necessarily all because of lack of integration policies, lack of being exposed to discrimination. There are many reasons why this happens, but it happens. So the real issue here is, as in Turkey actually, like in European countries, we can say this young Muslim underprivileged persons are being radicalized because of discrimination. But in Turkey, we are a 98% Muslim country, or in other Muslim countries. So there is radicalization in Turkey too. So we need to look into the problem, all of us. But Turkey did not send the people to other countries through other countries. We had been detaining people who are trying to cross Syria, which for reasons which we believe to join these groups. There are more than 5,000 detentions. There are more than 3,000 arrests. So it's big numbers.
And considering the European numbers and considering the other Middle Eastern numbers, how is Turkey doing in terms of the percentage of people who try to join?
It's so minimal that it's not percentage. It's in somewhere in 0.000. So it's the if you're asking the risk of this radicalization in Turkey compared to others, I could say, is there a risk? Yes, but the risk is not a mass risk. This is not about the communal issue. This is about there are certain individuals who are prone to radicalization for whichever reason. And that's also happened, by the way, in the left revolutionary radicalization. It happened with the PKK. So radicalization is not a specific issue for the groups that are exploiting religious beliefs. So radicalization is across the board an issue.
So, so would you say that in Turkey then the radicalization more happens with the more left wing, as you said, or left ideology oriented organizations?
In the past, of course, because if we're talking about the history of terrorism in Turkey, history of political violence and extremism, violent extremism in Turkey, that's true. But also there were what we call the right wing and left wing. So we have to, there were other groups who also exploited religion in Turkey, and that also caused an issue. And I would remember in late 1990s, 2000s, there was the Hizbullah Ilim group. Then the police operations went, and then they formed a political party. So we have lessons learned from our past, and I think we should continue studying that. But I think the most important thing is Turkey is very sincere in counterterrorism and very sincere in cooperating in countering terrorism and this political violence, the threat of political violence. And we do not really understand when we don't get the same answer from our partners. And the reality is the double standards always fail. They hit back. So it's not I think in the long run, the Turkey's stance, this stand of principles in counterterrorism will win.
Thank you, Ms. Yazgan. Thanks for joining us today in Istanbul.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.